breakfast, a Hindu folktale. Once in India, there were two very generous kings, although one was more generous than the other. First came King Karna, who called himself the most generous king of all, for he gave 100 pounds of gold to all the villagers every morning. In fact, he vowed not to eat on any morning until he did just that. But where he got all this gold from was always such a mystery. Then came King Vikram, who was just as generous as King Karna. Oh, so big-hearted was King Vikram. He would do anything for anyone if they asked. His favors were just free. His fame spread far and wide, so much so even animals were asking him for help. So one morning, as King Vikram was taking a stroll in his palace garden, two geese flew to him and said, "Good morning, King Vikram. We beg you, we're hungry, we're starving in fact. We beg you to feed us." And of course, King Vikram, being himself, nodded and said yes. But that's when the gander reminded the king that they come from a very sacred lake. So they only eat fresh pearls. And that is when King Vikram nodded once again and said, "Yes, fresh pearls it shall be." And just like that, the king was feeding these geese every morning until one day, female geese saw that one of the pearls were pierced. She turned to her mate and said, "Look, these pearls aren't fresh. He's a scam." And just like that, the geese flew away, but they still praised the king for his efforts. Thanks to King Vikram, the most generous king of all. And just like that, the geese were gone. Now their praises were so loud and spread wide that even King Karna got a whiff of this. So he had his hunter capture these geese. In a cage they lie. King Karna questioned them and said, "What does King Vikram do that I don't? Does he give 100 pounds of gold to the villagers every morning?" The gander shakingly said, "No, but he feeds pearls from his hand. And he doesn't imprison the innocent," said the female geese as she added on. King Karna shook his head and he opened the cage to put in some pearls so they wouldn't starve. But that's when quickly the female geese escaped. She flew to King Vikram and told him the whole story and begged, just begged for his help. Of course, King Vikram shook his head. And just like that, the next morning, King Vikram dressed himself in these ragged clothes and went to King Karna and said, "King Karna, you are the most generous king of all. Let me learn from you. Let me be your servant." Of course, King Karna smiled and said, "Yes." So just like that, the servant and the king were handing out gold that very same day. And that's when King Vikram thought to himself once again, where does the king get this gold from? So the following morning, King Vikram decided to follow Karna to see where he gets the gold from. King Karna walks into this deep, dark forest and is presented in front of this scrawny, squint-eyed hermit, and there's a crackling fire in this pan, and suddenly King Karna is inside the pan, and he sizzles and he fries, and he's in this crispy golden brown, and the hermit eats him up, and the hermit lays the bones out, waves his hand and says, "Bones are good, but flesh is best. Let him give life while I digest." And just like that, King Karna is back to life. The hermit grabs his magical quote, shakes it, and suddenly there's 100 pounds of gold. "Ugh, King Karna, you know I keep my side of the bargain." That's where the king gets his gold from. So Vikram woke very early the following morning. He covered himself in these spices, however, went to the deep dark forest, saw the pan, got into the pan, and he sizzled and frizzled until he was this crispy brown color. And as the hermit was eating him up, the hermit was quite pleased with this new aroma. The hermit grabbed the bones, laid them out, waved his hands, and said, "Bones are good, but flesh is best. Give him life while I digest." And just like that, King Vikram was back to life, though the hermit thought he was King Karna. "King Karna, how did you taste so good today?" King Vikram said. "Well, dear hermit, it was the new spices." Hermit smiled and said, "Wow." King Vikram then said, "I promise to spice myself every day if you give me the coat. Do you know how hard it is to carry the gold up to the palace? Just let me keep the coat." With no hesitation, the hermit said yes. It wasn't soon after King Karna came to the hermit, and the hermit broke the news that the coat isn't with him. Suddenly, King Karna grew furious and said, "Oh, so some random person comes and you give him the coat? How stupid are you, hermit?" The hermit was furious and said, "Yes, I should have known. You could never taste that good, you old goat." The villagers never got the gold that day, so King Karna never ate. He went back to his palace and lied in his bed, starving. But that's, of course, when King Vikram came to his bedside and said, "Oh dear King Karna, there's no need for you to stay hungry. I'll give you this coat with all the gold you want if you promise of two things. If you promise to free the geese and also cover yourself in spices every day for the dear hermit." King Karna jumped with joy and said, "Yes, of course!" And just like that, the geese was free. And so they yelled and shouted and praised the king once again. "Thanks, thanks, King Vikram, the most generous king of all."